Donc, bonjour à toutes et à tous. Nous vous souhaitions la bienvenue à l'événement cet après-midi avec Swapnaa Tamhane, Sohrab Hura et Prajakta Potnis, présenté dans le cadre de l'exposition Constitution à l'affiche à la Galerie Léonard de Binalen jusqu'au 22 janvier. Mon nom est Robin Simpson et je suis le coordinateur des programmes publics éducatifs à la Galerie, ici à l'Université Concordia à Montréal. Nous aimerions commencer par reconnaître que l'Université Concordia est située en territoire autochtone non cédé et que la nation Ganyang-Haga est gardienne des terres et des eaux sur lesquelles nous nous réunissons. C'est dans le respect des liens avec le passé, le présent et l'avenir que nous continuons d'entretenir des relations avec les divers peuples autochtones et autres groupes qui résident à Tiohtià:ke, Montréal. Une note sur le protocole de l'événement aujourd'hui. Nous vous demandons de garder votre micro fermé pendant la conversation. La conversation sera suivie par une période de questions dans laquelle vous êtes tous et toutes invités à participer. Note que l'événement déroulera en anglais. Toutefois, soyez à l'aise de poser vos questions dans la langue de votre choix, soit à vive voix ou de les taper dans le chat et nous pouvons les traduire. Alors, je vous offre une courte introduction à Swapnaa, Sohrab et Prajakta avant que je passe à l'anglais moi-même. L'artiste et commercial Swapnaa Tamhane détient une maîtrise en art contemporain de l'Université de Manchester 2001 et maîtrise en art visuel en fibre et pratique matérielle de l'Université Concordia 2021. Sa pratique en art visuel se concentre sur le dessin ainsi que la décolonisation de l'art, de l'artisanat et du dessin et du design. Elle prépare des expositions individuelles au Royal Ontario Museum de Toronto et au Victoria et Albert Museum de Dundee. Elle était commissaire de l'exposition collective In Order to Join, The Political in a Historical Moment, en collaboration avec Suzanne Titz, 2014 à 2015, et Here, Locating Contemporary Canadian Artists, 2017. Elle s'intéresse aussi à la culture matérielle et, en collaboration avec la designer Rashmi Varma, elle a été commissaire de SAR, The Essence of Indian Design, exposition pour laquelle elle a rédigé le texte de présentation publié par Phaidon Press en 2016. Née à Chinsura, dans le Bengale occidental, Inde, en 1981, Hura réside et travaille à New Delhi. Après avoir terminé une maîtrise en économie à la Delhi School of Economics, Hura s'est consacré à la photographie, à l'écriture et à la vidéo et au son puissant, à la fois dans le documentaire social et le témoignage. Son premier film, Patti, 2010, a documenté la vie quotidienne d'un ensemble de petits villages au centre de l'Inde suite à un voyage en bus dans le nord de l'Inde comme participant au Right to Food Movement. Hura a réalisé plusieurs expositions solo et contribué à des expositions collectives en Inde, aux États-Unis, en Europe et en Chine. Son film Bittersweet a reçu le Grand Prix de jury international de 66 International Short Film Festival Oberhausen Online en 2020. Il a publié 4 ouvrages, notamment The Coast, 2019, pour lequel il a reçu le prix de livre photographique de l'année de la Fondation Aperture Paris Photo 2019. Le travail de Prajakta Potnis se situe à la frontière de la fragilité du corps humain et de la rapacité de l'État capitaliste. Par la peinture, la radiographie, la vidéo et l'installation de nature temporelle, elle explore le corps exploité et surchargé qui résulte d'une exposition à des substances toxiques. Son travail s'intéresse à la fracture des genres et des castes, aux siennes de travail domestique, à la porosité des frontières et des oppositions binaires intérieures-extérieures, public-privé, naturel-transformé. Elle détient un BFA et un MFA de la Sir J.J. School of Art à Mumbai, en Inde, en 1995 et en 2002. Et en 2016 à 2017, Potnis a reçu la bourse Umrao Singh Shirgil pour la photographie. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's event with Swapnaa Tamhane, Sohrab Hura, and Prajakta Potnis, presented as part of the exhibition Constitutions on View at the gallery until January 22nd. My name is Robin Simpson, and I'm the coordinator of public programs and education here at the Leonard and Bina Ellen Art Gallery. We'd like to acknowledge that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous lands, and the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation are recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Tiohtià:ke Montreal community. A note on protocol today. We ask that you please keep your microphones closed during the conversation. The conversation will be followed by a discussion during which you are all invited to participate in. And now a short introduction to Swapnaa, Sohrab, and Prajakta before I pass it on to them. An artist and curator, Swapnaa Tamhane has an MA in Contemporary Art, University of Manchester, 2001, and an MFA in Fibers, Material Practices, Concordia University, 2021. Her visual practice is dedicated to drawing and decolonizing art, craft, and design. She has upcoming solo exhibitions at the Royal Ontario Museum, Toronto, and the Victoria and Albert Museum, Dundee. She curated the group exhibition In Order to Join, the Political in a Historical Moment with Suzanne Titz, and Here, Locating Contemporary Canadian Artists, 2017. Her interests also extend to material culture, and with designer Rashmi Varma, she curated and wrote SAR, The Essence of Design, published by Phaidon Press, 2016. Born in Chinchura, West Bengal, India in 1981, Hura currently lives and works in New Delhi. After receiving a master's in economics from the Delhi School of Economics, Hura began to work in photography, text, moving image, and sound, mixing social documentary with personal testimony. His first film, Patti, 2010, documents daily life in a small village cluster in central India and was made following a 50-day bus journey across northern India's rural belt as part of the Right to Food movement. He has presented group and solo exhibitions in India, Europe, and the United States, as well as China. And Hura's film Bittersweet, 2020, received the principal prize of the international jury at the 66th International Short Film Festival, Oberhausen Online. He has self-published 4 books, notably The Coast, 2019, for which he received the Paris Photo Aperture Photo Book of the Year Award in 2019. Prajakta Potnis' work digs deeper into the nexus between the frailty of a human body and the greed of a capitalist state. Through the processes of painting, radiology, video, and time-paced installation, she examines the overburdened body that has been incessantly exposed to varied forms of toxicity. Her works draw upon the chasm witnessed within the everyday domestic in the context of gender and social divides, as well as investigating the porousness of boundaries and binaries, such as inside, outside, public, private, and natural engineered. She received her BFA and MFA from Sir J.J. School of Art, Mumbai, India, 1995, in 2002. Potnis was the recipient of the Umrao Singh Shirgil Grant for Photography 2016 to 2017. So I'll now pass it on to Swapnaa and Sohrab and Hura. Welcome everyone and enjoy the conversation.
Thank you, Robin, for that introduction. Welcome, everyone, and thank you to the Leonard and Bina Allen Gallery for inviting me, and Michelle Theriault for inviting me to curate this exhibition. This exhibition is titled Constitutions, and it was really a title that was inspired by all of the artists who are in this exhibition, Sohrab, Prajakta, Barinder Yadav, Rajashri Goody, and Sajjan Mani, and thinking about these kind of very complex states of the body and the state itself. So just wanted to say that you know, I had a very different title for this exhibition, but it did change due to really looking at your works, in particular, Sohrab, with the piece Scramble, which is sort of not really a triptych, but it's a kind of a series of 3 iconic images, 2 which are portraits, one of Ambedkar and one of Nehru, and the third is sort of an iconic portrait of the preamble to the Constitution of India. And so with Sajjan's work here that you can see that Robin just is playing, that's actually a drawing of the Constitution in Malayalam. So it's just interesting that there's these kind of recurring ideas of this idea of a constitution. I wanted to quickly speak about the works that are included, and thank you for agreeing to be in this exhibition, and thank you for doing this talk on a Friday evening. It's quite late for you in Delhi and Mumbai. The works by Sohrab are, so the 2 pieces you just saw there, or the 3 works you just saw there, as well as a moving image work titled The Lost Head and the Bird. And we're looking at Prajakta's works right now, which were part of an exhibition that was titled A Body Without Organs at Project 88 in Mumbai, which opened in March 2020, and then I believe closed a week later because of the sudden announcement of the lockdown. So it was very interesting that it was, you know, you're talking about these sort of internal states, and then it became an internal exhibition in a way as well. So just a very quick intro to your works there. And I'd like to really begin with asking both of you, who are, you work in very different media in different ways completely, but in sort of prepping for this exhibition and this talk, I could see there's a lot of very interesting, I wouldn't say overlaps, but points of connection between your works. And so I'd like to both ask you how you negotiate this idea of dormancy or something lying dormant. Sort of with both of your works, there's this feeling of something bubbling beneath the surface. And I'd like to ask, you know, how is that sensation? How does it come through in your works? And maybe we can start with you, Sohrab.
I think, you know, when I began as a photographer, I mean, I think even in school, from the time when I was growing up as a kid, I think I was always, I think for me, history was always made up of events. And I think that, you know, as time passed, I mean, even when I became a photographer, I think I was actually looking at events, you know, in photography, whether it was the Narega, the act of for employment, you know, universal employment for all households in rural India. I think the more time that passed, I ended up getting more and more interested in patterns in the system. I think there was a distance between me and what I was looking at. I started to kind of get more aware of my own location with what I was photographing. and over time, I realized that, you know, a lot of my work was actually dealing with my entire timeline of from the time I was actually making sense of the world, from the time I was actually absorbing propaganda, information, all of those things. I mean, if you don't mind, I'm just going to also take you all just through very quickly from the 80s, 90s, 2000s, you know, just to kind of, you know, it began with listening to grandparents, you know, talking, telling me stories from the Ramayana and other sort of Hindu mythologies, which also got turned into, you know, these Sunday programs like Ramayana, and there were these other sort of religious-based programs, quite, in retrospect, stupid, but they always sent out these messages, you know, which were as undercurrents. Like you might have had these North Indians always playing gods. You know, you had the demons who were always depicted as being, you know, from being Dravidian. And you also had like this animation, which I don't know why and how I watched it for 10 years, every Sunday, Ek Chidiya, which is looking at, you know, national unity. And given the circumstances today, it's kind of scary, you know, to think of how like I was absorbing all of this, you know, and it seemed like a very cool thing. You know, first time I actually heard about terrorism was not really so much to do with Rajiv Gandhi's assassination, but more to do with, you know, the Kashmiri Pandit exodus. And at the same time, there was the Mandal Commission protests also that were happening. So as a kid, I was kind of absorbing all of these events. You have the Babri Masjid demolition, 1992, you know, where at that time, what was considered to be the fringe, you know, they broke down this mosque, which was, yeah, you know, I mean, led by the mainstream leaders of today. What was the, you know, fringe at that time is very much the mainstream. But the truth is that actually it was always the mainstream, you know. So there were these undercurrents that were always there. You had the 1993 blast, which was supposedly the retaliation to the, you know, the demolition of the mosque. At the same time, 1995, you had, you know, going back in Kashmir, the 5 foreigners who were actually kidnapped, and one of them was found beheaded. The rest of the bodies were never found. So there was, as a kid, for me, you know, a feeling of Kashmir also building as a sort of a dangerous place and associating with terrorism, you know. You had the Kargil war, you know, between India and Pakistan in the same region. And I was still in high school. I was 17 or so at that time. It was only when I was in university that I actually got to know about Kunan and Pushpora, you know, where the Indian Army had actually raped quite a few women in 2 villages called Kunan and Pushpora in Kashmir in, I think, 1990 or 91. But I'd never really heard about it. You know, it was something that I got to know only later on when I think I had to proactively search for this information. So what I'm actually trying to lay out over here is, you know, simply because I think I read in Prajakta and Swapna's beautiful, you know, essay about, there was a mention of all the artists being kind of from the same generation. And what for me became really interesting over time was to look at how I was representative of a certain generation, and I guess also generations before and after me that had actually grown up at a certain time, which was at the cusp of liberalization. And I grew up with Ek Chidiya and Ek Chidiya, that really sad animation, but amazing animation in the same way. And I jumped straight onto MTV because that had kind of come in. And television actually became a very important part of my, you know, making sense of the world. And that's where I was kind of getting all this information, you know, where the terrorist attack in the parliament, for which, you know, Afzal Guru, Kashmiri, who was jailed, and, you know, he was also hanged in 2013 as part of it. 2014, we started to see, you know, and I'd already started to sense a build up of a certain kind, which would have been, it was post the India Shining moment. I think it was maybe arrogance that I was sensing. There was this pride, but the pride kind of started to turn into kind of a rabid nationalism of sorts. And, these images that I was seeing were sea of Modi masks at that time. Even my parents were not, my father, was kind of in a way swayed more from an anti-Congress sentiment. There was, Bal Narendra, childhood stories of Narendra Modi with him kind of fighting off crocodiles and things, So there was this image of a strong man that was also being developed. I don't know if you all heard about JNU, what was happening there, about anti-national. There were these, slogans like anti-national, anyone questioning the government, anyone sort of asking questions were being termed as anti-national, urban Naxals. The press was being termed as prostitutes. And simultaneously, Modi's image was being also kind of built. Amit Shah, where he famously said, real or fake, we can go any message go viral. So there were these kind of, before elections, after elections, before events, there were these sort of strings being pulled and, the system was being puppeteered in some ways. The same, after the Kashmir blast, which affected the elections in a big way, Devinder Singh, the police officer who got caught coming back with militants, he was the same person who actually Afzal Guru had written about almost, 20 years before, 15, 20 years before. So there is, if it took me a lot of time to actually understand these undercurrents, like the Ramayana that I grew up with was replayed during the lockdown last year at a time when it was post, the protests against the Citizenship Act and so on. So there was this kind of a push for a strong Hindutva motive, because last year at the same time, there's also been a call to kind of build a new temple in Mathura and, in the sites of where mosques exist today. And there's this claim that at some point there was a temple there. Of course, the court granted bail to the same officer who has been coming up because the police didn't really file, the arrest properly. And just to end over here briefly, which was just like 3 days ago, this is the National Human Rights Commission, which is, putting up this topic saying our human rights stumbling block in fighting evils like terrorism and Naxalism. So, it's been a pattern where you actually notice how, like most of us, I realized, like in the beginning, I was searching for events, like these big explosive events, but the real stuff was actually happening in these undercurrents. They were happening more silently in just the way the words are being used, like human rights, a stumbling block in fighting evils like terrorism, Naxalism. And these are the same words, terrorism, Naxalism, that have been thrown at in the last 7 years at, at anyone sort of asking questions. What I'm laying out is a very incomplete picture. And I actually believe that this has been happening for decades. It's been not just about BJP, it's actually something, I mean, it's how I think history has been built. But it's taking me a long time to step back quite a bit and actually look more at the system and the way actually I feel today that, power, like it's all about power, and power is actually it's all about tinkering and not so much in terms of complete disruption. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, I think what's really important when you address the idea of this kind of similar generation, having grown up with the television. So prior from, I remember there were like 3 or 4 channels prior to economic liberalization in 91. And from what I understand of the Babri Masjid, that it was actually televised live. So yeah. Suddenly it wasn't an event that happened somewhere in India. It was actually in everyone's living rooms. And that's a huge moment to understand. And I like how you've kind of traced this idea of a development of, this kind of seeding quality that is occurring. And you're absolutely right. It's not something that's happening just since 2014, for instance. It's really been in development for decades. And it's interesting how you relate to kind of the MTV culture coming in, and also, you know, with the kind of pacing of your images in your video. With Prajakta, like how would you sort of address my question of thinking about something lying dormant, and particularly with your larger body that you had developed for your exhibition, A Body Without Organs, which is a chapter from Deleuze and Guattari's A Thousand Plateaus.
Yeah, thanks, Swapna, and thanks, Sohrab. I think you almost laid the platform for all of us to speak today, because without that would just make no sense, you know, speaking about work. I think we've all seen this, and we've all kind of experienced it in different ways, and it has just got scarier, and it's almost like we're all living under fear. But we can speak about it later, and I'd like to kind of dwell directly into the question and speak about image making, and the idea of something lying dormant, or also kind of how we as artists add codes within a work, how we kind of in a very silent or a quiet way somehow weave certain meanings and disturbing meanings within works and encrypt images. I was quite, I thought that would be nice to kind of bring one particular example from Northeast. There was this one artist called Zamtingla Ruya. She's an artist from Nagaland, who created the Luingmala Kashan in memory of Miss Luingmala from Nagina village. Miss Luingmal was shot dead while resisting rape by 2 officers of the Indian Army on the 24th of January, 1986. So Zamtingla basically uses motifs from weaving traditions, and she weaves a kashan, a traditional garment that pays tribute to Luingmala and the spirit of a community ravaged by violence. Nagaland has been under Armed Forces Special Power Act since 1958. And today many members of the Tangpul community wear the Luingmala Kashan as a symbol of solidarity. And I thought that this was a very interesting kind of reference to how artists work within situations where voices are, you know, almost silenced. How do you still continue making work, which is, you know, where you manage to make your point forward? Within my own practice, I think I'm fascinated by the idea of encrypting an image, of layering it with meanings, of feelings. It has been part of my journey of making art. And so while even making paintings, I, in a strange way, I almost layer them 8 to 9 coats with the same paint. It is in the hope that these layers will carry some, you know, conceptual meanings, or almost a dense feeling of heaviness. This particular image is an old work that we saw, and this one that you see, can we halt here or? Yeah. Yeah. So this one is actually, there were these, it's an old work, but these were actually watermarks that I found in a space, and I just really wanted to make a watercolor painting, and I kind of painted on top of them. So there's this sense of seepage that happens within these works, but also I kind of wanted my work to almost infiltrate into a system in a way where I managed to try and work with site-specific installations, which I thought, you know, were, you know, almost in innocuous spaces where, you know, you are looking for an artwork or looking to see something and unexpectedly witness something. I'm also interested in testing if an innocuous everyday sighting or an occurrence can have the potential of transforming and bringing in associations from other contexts. Like a simple act of washing dishes for me, I find that extremely cathartic while washing dishes. And you know, this foamy, frothy foam that you know, is collected at the base of the kitchen sink in a slow-moving vortex. I've always been fascinated with these kind of everyday occurrences, and I've wondered if they can have some kind of a charge and can make meanings which are more than what they are or what they seem. So looking at that vortex of foam, I've always wondered, and I've always reminded myself of Solaris, you know, the last shot of that floating island that you see in Tarkovsky's film Solaris. And I've always wondered, is that how he must have shot it, you know, in a kitchen sink? Because, you know, you have this strange vision of almost like looking at something from far. And I think the work that is part of the show right now, the floating island, Swapna, can we see that?
I'm just going to pull that image up. And maybe you can talk a little bit about this connection to foam, actually, this idea of like using foam as a sort of leitmotif that represents so much. It's a very subtle, sort of choice, but it that idea of the seeping and this kind of like something, this idea of bubbling, you know, beneath the surface is really apparent with this work. This kind of idea of like, not just there's an impending sort of sensation that is brought in with these pieces.
Yeah, I mean, today when I look at it, it has a different charge for me. I think the images that we recently saw of people, you know, dipping in the frothy Yamuna were just, you know, extremely crazy. And, you know, so for me, I think this particular image just takes another tone. And I also feel that I hope that the images that one makes also have an afterlife of their own and live and make associations on their own. For me, it has multiple, you know, associations while I was making it. I mean, of course, one was the direct connection to toxicity and toxicity within everyday life. But the whole idea of also cleansing, which is also connected to caste in a way. So I mean, it's also a way of testing if this is what, you know, if it makes sense to others as well as it plays on its own. Yeah, so I think this idea of something, some meanings kind of brewing underneath the surface is something that I think artists have always tried to do in their work. And yeah.
But I mean, it's interesting that you choose foam, and particularly with your drawings. I just want to see if they're here. This toxic drawing series that sort of seems to be an ongoing series of works that are included in a number of your installations, where you use the material itself to then, you know, just thinking of this idea of like the subterfuge. It's really the drawing is like hidden beneath a surface, and we're denied access to the to having, well, I mean, a sense of pleasure and actually being able to look at the line and the line making. And at the same time, there's this feeling of something underneath this piece of foam. And it's, on one hand, it's a bit of a ghost image. On the other hand, it's like, there's a frustration, but there's also a sense of like this sort of haunting feeling of not being quite sure. And in the show that's at the Ellen Gallery now, the two toxic drawings that are included
Are actually lung drawings, yeah.
yes, maybe you can just talk about
the foam, yeah, the foam actually works. I mean, in the toxic drawings, it works almost like a filter on a photo, you know, that you're viewing this drawing on the wall through this filter, and this polyurethane foam is almost like a flattened froth for me, which I kind of pin onto the wall. Yeah, the idea was to look at something through a lens of it. So the material becomes the lens of viewing the drawing that's underneath. And the two drawings, sorry?
So I was just gonna, I mean, we're looking at an older work here.
Yeah.
With the works at the Ellen Gallery now, they're, I mean, this sort of leads me to my next question for both of you as well, but this relationship to the body and the two drawings that are at the Ellen Gallery that are under the foam are their lungs. It's a right and a left lung. And yeah, maybe you can speak a little bit about the sort of story behind that, that body of work.
Yeah, so I mean, that particular, so I think in 2018, there was this close family member, an uncle of mine who complained of breathing issues. And soon, I mean, when he went to the doctor, the first thing that they asked was, you know, where had he worked? And he's almost like an 80-year-old, so he had retired and things like that. So he had worked in a soap detergent factory in his, you know, working age, and he had retired for almost 10, 15, I mean, I think 20 years. It was only after 15, 20 years that these chemicals that were there in his lungs started kind of erupting. And he had serious breathing issues. So I went through a lot of his x-rays, and I was quite obsessed with looking at all those images and his medical conditions and things like that. But so I was quite sure I wanted to work with the idea of a body, of an overburdened body, but it was also, I think, in the air that, you know, we were all thinking of or sensing something that was impending, like the pandemic, I think, or also what was happening around, where, you know, you could see bodies.
You had started working on this before COVID.
Yeah. There was absolutely, I mean, I think around 2018, I was working on he was diagnosed with some lung infections and breathing issues. So these works were made before the pandemic, and of course it takes another, I mean, I find it really strange when I look at them now. And then even more stranger when just in the month of July, my mom was detected of cancer, which kind of went towards the lungs. So it's quite strange looking at these works in today's, personally where I am. So coming back to the toxic drawings, I was quite sure of working with these two lungs. There's the left lung and the right lung. But for body, for me, I think has had multiple meanings. I think it's almost like a carrier, a register of sorts, and where, you know, your experiences, your genetic inheritances of illnesses and things get kind of almost registered. And yeah, I think I'll let Sohrab speak and then maybe come back to.
Yeah, and just before moving to Sohrab's work, just to say that these were, in a way, this idea of the imprint of labor within the body. So not just on the surface, not just on the skin, but really inside of the body, and undetected, something that then becomes apparent only years later, in which case nobody is then responsible for that imprint.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in thinking about that idea of the constitution of, of the body, it's really like something that is such a fragile state that continues to then, it's like something imploding within that is undetected. And then in Sohrab, with your moving image work, the lost head and the bird, and just thinking again, really, it's quite a simple question in a sense, but your relationship to this body, because the moving image work starts with these sort of flashes that accumulate, and then it leaves a sort of retinal trace, and then you start to see the image of this body that is, I wouldn't say headless, and I wouldn't even say without a head. It's just that there's a full body that's missing this kind of integral part of its completion, and it's an image that's in a room, so it's a very intimate image, photograph. And I was thinking about this, between both of your works, there's a sense of like the disembodiment in very separate, different ways. And your work is, you really photograph and document, people across this, a broad spectrum, from your earlier works, and your travels on the Right to Food campaign. And then looking at your photography from the coast. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about, your relationship to like the body and figuration and its sort of larger kind of representation for you.
I think at least of late, the body for me has been a location or a site in which events occur. I think that's the way that's my relationship, I think. And I think that the body also exists in different contexts. In The Lost Head and the Bird, Madhu, the protagonist, the protagonist in the short story, her head has been stolen by a lover, and an obsessive lover. And in the story, there are also two other male protagonists. One is a fortune teller who keeps selling her a parrot, who keeps selling her a crow, but tells her that it's a parrot with a bad cough. And because she doesn't have a head, she can't see that it's a crow and not a parrot, but she gives into the trust and buys it. There is also an idiot photographer in there, which is me, and also the viewer, the participant.
I really like that you always call it the idiot photographer. It's not just a photographer, it's always the idiot photographer.
Because the work is also actually a critique of a certain kind of, because I think I started off looking at the system again of images that were being circulated. I was quite sort of influenced by social media imagery, glitches, this whole thing of how does one make someone believe. So even though some of the images might be constructed like Prajakta was saying, like codes and algorithms within images, how to kind of use a certain kind of vocabulary to make it feel real, because in the end, images for me are all projections, and there are many after images to each image. So for me, in the story itself, because there is one body which is kind of experiencing violence from these other three sort of male protagonists, one who's stolen the head, the other one who's betraying an act of faith by selling a crow instead of a parrot, and also the idiot photographer who wants to, in the story, photograph all the vicious and wonderful things along the coastline. So there is a sort of, the body has a certain meaning within the story, but then that particular body without the head is also a metaphor for like how, of an overburdened body, which for me is, I photographed along the coastline, not really to represent anyone there, but more to kind of use the coastline as a metaphor for something that is holding in, Prajakta is looking at from the inside, I'm looking at from the outside, where it's holding in something that's about to either implode, explode. It's a breaching point of sorts. And of course, for me, the coast was also, with the waves, the way the sea kind of touches land, which is not one definite line, but it keeps, shifting. It's fluid, the coastline, where water touches land. I think for me, that became a sort of a metaphor for something that is about to give, a breaching point, tipping point. And of course, the work in some ways was also, so it's like a country without a lost head in some ways, or the idea of a nationhood without a head, without any thinking, but at the same time, it was also me sort of vomiting everything out. That's like, I also felt like a medium, in a way, I think all of us are kind of absorbing everything that is happening, and in a way we are regurgitating it out. And for me, it was also me vomiting something out of the head. Body for me is not only something which is, figurative, but also I think in terms of the idea. And a lot of my work also is done in a journal-like format from a first-person perspective, or referencing myself into it. If I'm talking about the violence of image making, I have to kind of place myself in it as an image maker. Or if I'm photographing my mom, who has schizophrenia, to talk about schizophrenia, I have to kind of look at my own story. Or if I'm looking at Kashmir and, trying to, I don't see myself as someone who has the place to give I don't have any lived experience in Kashmir as a Kashmiri, but for me, I'm using, for example, seasons like snow as a metaphor for mask of denial that comes off my face as an outsider. So that's my position also as the self, in the works that I'm doing. Because I think that the body, or in this case, the self, can also become a site for a sort of a conversation, which, especially in a highly polarized world, I think for me, it's also a strategy, to kind of bring in the self to really open up a conversation, which usually it's a zero-sum game. It doesn't really go beyond. So in a way, I can critique myself, for example, for being the occupier. I can sort of critique myself for being the idiot photographer. And so body kind of comes in for me in all these different sort of ways.
And Prajakta, you speak about the overburdened body, and that's something that I think that's running through a lot of your work. What do you mean by that? What is an overburdened?
I think it is the body of the laborer, the worker, who's almost part of the, the whole capitalist system. It's this body that's been used, exploited, and then discarded. And I think it's extremely frustrating when you see that within how almost unemotionally somebody gets thrown out of the system. So I think the overburdened body for me is an integral part of this machinery that also allows for an uninterrupted capitalist state to function. So to answer that question, I think that. But I think what's also interesting with Sohrab work, and I think we as artists share, is also representing something through its absence. And I think I remember in college, in an art college that I went to, I found it extremely challenging and difficult to represent a human figure, literally, because, you know, as an art student, that's where you start from, you know, the body. The first thing is that, you know, and I found it extremely challenging. And I think the reason was also because you place, I mean, if you formally look at it, you place a human figure in a space, it immediately starts narrating and illustrating something. And I found that extremely like a limitation of sorts, where you place a body in a space and it starts narrating something. So I kind of went, almost I took refuge in objects, and I thought that one could speak about something through the absence of it. Yeah, and I think that is how I have dealt with the human figure, at least in terms of representation of it, of sorts. But I've been fascinated. I think the body, which is also a repository of illness and has, you know, various things, I think comes from various personal experiences. Been fascinated with walls in middle class homes, and I think almost look at walls as skins and membranes through which things kind of pass through. And I think this relationship with skin and the membrane and the wall is, I think, a lot to do with certain personal you know, associations of seeing my father's feet with you know, colored skin patches. He had psoriasis, and since they're your father's feet, you are not repulsed with it. You know, I would almost have this amazing sense of wonder when I looked at it, and I, you know, I almost could see and check how they would change in every season. So there's this strange association with, I think, illness also within the body and within the work. But within the current context also, I think what we are left with is absolutely nothing. No, I mean, what we've seen in the past few few months, especially, is the body of the migrant walking on the streets, the bodies of you know, people who died because of, you know, lack of oxygen, the people, the bodies of the farmers who are protesting for more than a year out there in open. So it really boils down to, if you have nothing left with you, what you have is only your body. And I think would just like to kind of you know, evoke this one imagery of these Manipuri women who, you know, protested naked outside this Kangla fort. I think this was in you know, 15th of July 2004, and they were protesting outside naked, carrying placards saying you know, come Indian Army, rape us. So I think that's like a super strong image of protest related to the body in a way. And
Can I ask you?
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah.
This, I'm curious because we are slowly, like, I also felt like body, you know, kind of gives, it's like one anchor of reality as well, that we exist, right? As we are kind of falling into this sort of a digital space where we are going to the realms of deep fake, and, you know, I mean, the screen is becoming reality in some ways, and, you know, the interface of reality, and not so much the real world. Like, do you see, either of you, like, how do you see the body kind of, you know, like, what's the body then, you know, like that thing, like someone mentioned, I have a body, therefore I am. So I'm just curious to know, because I'm sensing a sort of a shift also happening in terms of these multiple lives that kind of, you know, because at some point one life was fixed to a body, but now there's so many lives that I don't know which one I'm really occupying.
Yeah. No, absolutely, Sohrab. I think it's an interesting point. And yeah, you've just taken that one last bit of hope away as well of, but no, but absolutely true. I mean, we've where do we find ourselves in this whole situation of the digital as well? Um, but I think I still feel that if I mean, the street and the body is something I think that is something that we still have. Um, if anything happens, you can go out on the street and at least, stand there. I mean, I think that's how I at least look at it. But of course, one cannot deny the fact that we're all living in these, boxes of screens and almost understanding each other through that. But
Like,
yeah, but yeah, yeah.
I mean, something that Prajakta, when we spoke in preparing for this exhibition, you said the same thing, that all you have left is your body, and that you have the right to dissent with that body. And so the body becomes a kind of container, this sort of membrane, and then sort of the coast is very much that membrane that is like just about to sort of burst, or break. And I just want to say something before I forget. As you were sort of speaking earlier, Prajakta, this, the idea with this exhibition was to really sort of complicate how we think about caste, and even to announce it, and how we think about the body, and what that really means in terms of this system of exploitation that has existed for since time immemorial, in the codification of a division of labor in society. And currently we're witnessing just a real suppression of minorities, religious minorities, but also the whole case with beef and who's eating beef and who's not eating beef, and cleaning carcasses. And I think, Sohrab, there's an image in your in The Lost Head and the Bird, and I'm also thinking about the bodies that represent and how they're also utilized. In one like flash in your piece, there's an image of that tailor Qutbin Ansari, who became like the face of the Gujarat riots from 2002. And in just thinking about how he came to represent a particular moment, that image has now been utilized by the Congress. And so he's also resenting how he's being projected into public space, through the time right now. And the work that you made with The Lost Head and the Bird is a culmination of photographs, but towards the end that you've taken, and then towards the end, it's a series of found images that become what you call a maelstrom. And it just like, it moves into this kind of like vortex. And I mean, it's interesting that, Prajakta, you also use the word vortex when you're thinking of this like foam going into this drain. And it's amazing how you both have these like, these kinds of these feelings of something really spinning out of control. And I'm just going to show Sohrab some images from the coast. So I'll just play this, and if you could speak a little bit about, well, I guess on one hand, how you developed a narrative for this work.
So I think I began with just making the images. That was say around 2013. Like I was mentioning before, that there was a sort of a build-up that I was already sensing, whether it was the gaze, whether it was the body language, the way people were kind of, like how right now also you had the India versus Pakistan match and all the stuff that happened around. I think for me, I saw it happening simultaneously with this whole India shining sort of moment, where there was this newfound pride which kind of developed into something quite nasty. And I was already seeing images which were which felt sort of intrusive and violent and so on. And there was a code that I picked up on in terms of, that image. And I also started to kind of reenact that same code to kind of get on to that sort of way of, image making. And it was also when context around other images started to get disrupted, so you would have like Hindu Katre Mein, which was, being circulated everywhere, and there would be some, like how, for example, even all the images of riots and all are all have a burning bus, at least in our part of the world. No matter where it is, there'll be a burning bus, there'll be burning tires and so on. And those started kind of getting circulated, and it was being said how in Bengal, the Hindus are in danger because it's bordering Bangladesh. So I started to kind of realize that having been so invested in image making at some point, coming from a very sort of, very earnest documentary space where you are kind of in a way trying to tell a story, the story is based on truth and so on. But then you realize that actually speaking, there is no, the truth isn't fixed. It keeps getting manipulated depending on the context. So I started to play with the juxtapositions, mainly to kind of, in a way, not let any image stay stable. It was a kind of experiment at that time. And, there were two things happening simultaneously. What you see is the book, The Coast. The Coast has this short story called The Lost Head and the Bird, which in itself became the video piece, which was The Lost Head and the Bird, where the same juxtaposition that's there in The Coast, starts off slowly with the one image flashing that you were talking about, with my voice kind of narrating the story over it. And then this sort of a juxtaposition starts, alternating juxtaposition. And it also brings in this element of pace and time. At what pace are we actually absorbing information, So the idea to kind of take it into a vortex was for two things. One was to also kind of, in a way, let the viewer sense a relation to what an image feels at what pace you consume it, because today I think I'm consuming information faster and faster and faster. And you have so many events of violence, whether it's riots or whatever, being engineered and re-engineered, but there is no sort of, it's all happening. People say it's happening spontaneously, but it's all engineered to not sort of give people a chance to look again at what has been given. So, one of the other images in the Maelstrom was of Mohammed Akhlaq, the person, in UP some years ago, maybe 2015, there was a rumor spread that he's eating beef, the family's eating beef. And you had these goons that kind of came into the house, lynched him to death. And there was an FIR filed against him and his family even after his death for having eaten beef. Not much was done to the people who killed him, but everything became about beef. And there was money spent on sending it on for postmortem. The
forensic of the meat,
Yeah.
I think, was done, and it seems it was just goat meat or something.
Yeah, it was mutton. It was mutton. But it was just very absurd. So, for me, there was this absurdity that was coming up everywhere, which you didn't know how the hell to explain, which is where I started to cook up this story as well of this, because for me, I think at that time, at that moment, like what Prajakta was saying, that, and what you were talking about Prajakta's work about there being this extra layer on top of the toxic paintings. For me, the layer was actually fiction, to kind of bring in this, to open up something. Not necessarily. So what I'm really obsessed with right now is to unfix things rather than to fix, because I feel like we are living in a world where these images which are being circulated are meant to fix meanings, you know, it's meant to kind of divide, it's meant to polarize. So in my work, I'm constantly trying to unfix rather than to fix. So, which is why when you see these 12 stories, even the narrative, which is kind of, there are 12 narrations to it in the work that's being projected in at the gallery right now. In the video work, it's in 12 different iterations in variable loop, where different sort of a slightly different variation of the story is narrated, and seemingly harmless words are being changed, just like the last image that I'd shown of the National Human Rights Commission, the way they're kind of playing with words to give meaning, to kind of associate meaning to certain things. So in the, it's a bit like the game of Chinese whispers, where the more you kind of repeat, the meaning kind of changes into something else. So in the first iteration, in the original iteration, you have Madhu, the protagonist whose head has been stolen, and there are 3 perpetrators, all male, right? And in the 12th story, somehow all the 3 male perpetrators seem to have been absolved of their roles in it, and the blame is very conveniently shifted back to sort of this Madhu, the main protagonist. So if you look at the Me Too movement, and how, for example, you have these whenever, for example, someone gets called out, you suddenly have these insertions coming in to kind of diffuse the original sort of intent and accusation and so on. I think what I realized was that there was this sort of an image warfare. And for me, image is everything, image is not just a photograph. When I'm saying images, it could be text, it could be architecture, it could be sound, it could be any of these things. Image for me is more like a projection which is made out, and a projection that might be consumed, right? So, yeah, I mean, that was the sort of intent behind it. And the Coast is slightly more optimistic than The Lost and the Bird, because in the end, one goes off into the sea. The sea for me becomes a place of washing away of that mask that society is kind of wearing. Like even after the 2019 elections, the one thing that a lot of us were saying somehow was, I don't know whether Prajakta kind of also experienced it, but we kept saying this person's mask has come off, because after 2019, suddenly the same people who were posturing to be whatever, liberal, I mean, liberal anyway is very sort of a farcical term, but they were suddenly very openly supporting all the things that was what had seemed to be very unexpected of them. So sort of, like Prajakta was talking about cleansing in some ways. So same thing was happening even in the last bit of the book with the sea, where there is this cleansing of a different kind, where there's a washing away of that mask, which we wear to kind of, act in a certain way. So, I mean, for me, it was all about the different masks that society are wearing.
I mean, in a sense, The Lost Head and the Bird is something you worked on from 2016 to 19. And then The Coast as a photo book comes after. And I was interested in this, on one hand, your process of image making. I know that when we were talking, you were speaking about how the viral image, you're kind of in competition now with the viral image. And with Prajakta, I mean, it's interesting to see this kind of moving image work like projected at a large scale. It's really immersive. And it's completely seductive, and you're sort of hypnotized, and you're held by the pace, you're held by your voice in the story, and then you're held by the kind of like the rapid collection of images. And then also, very personal how you handwrite all of the captions and the sources from where you find everything. And with Prajakta, your sort of relationship to cinema, I know you talk about Tarkovsky so much. And it's so interesting how that comes through in your work in such a completely domestic way, and how you use the kitchen really as a site for this, for a collection of political commentaries. that are addressing, you know, the multiplicity of bodies that encountered this very tiny space of the kitchen, and all the significance behind that. And I'm just going to show your works that I was showing earlier. And I would like for you to just talk a little bit about this, these earlier pieces in which you...
Yeah, the kitchen platform ones.
Kitchen platform, and also the use of, you know, you speak about the middle-class home in India and the use of these appliances, but also if you can just talk a little bit about the kitchen as a site for these various bodies that come through.
Yeah, no, I've been fascinated by this side of the kitchen, and I think in middle-class homes, they're almost, you know, considered extremely pious and sacred. So a woman who's menstruating cannot enter the kitchen. A woman from a lower caste cannot enter the kitchen. I think just before the lockdown, so I think 2019 or 18, I read in the newspapers that someone in Pune, Pune is a city away from Bombay, 3 hours away from Bombay, a doctor sued her house help because she did not disclose her caste and she was cooking in her house happily. So this lady doctor was extremely offended that this woman cooked her meals, and she was basically from the lower caste. So of course there was a lot of backlash and things like that, but to even imagine that someone like this could go to a court and even try to do something like that. So I think I've been fascinated by the site of the kitchen for you know, I think various reasons. I think that it almost sets the stage for setting conversations about modernity, about tradition, about caste, about labor, and I don't know. I also myself enjoy you know, looking at certain things. So it also kind of, you know, like this particular work, it's an old work, 2008. And the initial idea was actually extremely, you know, physical in a way. I'd seen, I mean, I was fascinated by this whole Susan Sontag's, you know, illness as metaphor, and was also, there were these flashes of images of my mom's uterus full of fibroids laid on a petri dish, and you know, you have almost like these things growing inside. And I just wanted to, without thinking, I took all these everyday objects and I would kind of embellish them with these plastic beads and some mustard seeds. And so suddenly I had like some really odd number of like a lot of these everyday objects, and I really didn't know what to do with it because they were sculptural in a way, but I didn't want them to be on a pedestal and then view them from that perspective or lens. So I made these kitchen platforms, which are almost like low relief sculptural pieces, and I kind of placed these objects onto them. But I think
these kitchen platforms, I mean, this is a common material that's used for the counter.
Yeah, like the black granite is the safest one. You know, it doesn't have stains, and it will, you know, it's easier, especially when you're using turmeric and things like that. So it's nicer to have these dark surfaces which won't stain. So you usually see these platforms, kitchen platforms, this material on kitchen platforms. Also, when I was on a residency in Berlin in 2014, I was fascinated by this one conversation that happened in 1959 that I came across between Khrushchev and Nixon in front of a washing machine, and got famous as the kitchen debate. And it became like extremely hilarious. If you, I mean, the video is out there on YouTube and anybody can Google and see, and it's almost like these two boys, fighting and saying what is better. I mean, it was just hilarious, where Nixon goes on to say we make life better for housewives, and Khrushchev is very strongly thinking of communism. And so the kitchen also became a site for laying these kind of debates and conversations as well. But it so I kind of go back to these appliances and these everyday objects. I think it's also very easily accessible to me, that I just feel like I can just start making things.
But this one in particular, you photographed it inside of
yeah, it's a cauliflower inside a refrigerator. It's the refrigerator that we use. And there are also some interesting things that happen within the work while making, which are kind of, so I was quite, and I'm fascinated by the idea of staging something. And I think that goes to do with me growing up, watching a lot of Marathi plays and theater, and staging a conversation or a dialogue in a proscenium kind of a space. So the refrigerator for me became almost like the proscenium where one could stage narratives. The cauliflower, actually, of course, I was quite sure that I wanted it to look like a mushroom cloud exploding. And I had the initial idea of it, but so a lot of things happen also by chance, and also happen when you're not expecting it. And also the idea of being present in the moment, of accepting something. But yeah, I think that goes, I think I'm speaking more of, but yeah, can we see the one with the chopping board? I think the chopping board one.
the chopping board. Because I was also going to say
the light
that,
box. Yeah. So that particular one.
This one?
No. There's a light. Yeah, this one. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
The chopping. Yeah. So this particular one, again, I've worked with a used chopping board, and I've like drawn hands, and used the kitchen rag on top of it. So it's suggestive of, obviously, the element of labor. It's like the chopping board again almost becomes like a marker of the labor that's gone into making something. Yeah.
And I was going to say this, with both of you, you create moving images through these series of through series of stills, and I found that quite sort of interesting, that there are images that you take that are then put together.
I think it's sorry.
Go ahead.
No, it's, I think, to do with thinking of images through stillness of an image. I think I am fascinated by the stillness of an image, and I find it difficult to think in terms of a moving image. And I think this is just a ploy, a strategy to kind of animate something with stillness. But also the sound of the slide projector adds to the movement. It kind of animates the whole process. This particular one, there are like about 81 slides of the blender. It's just trying to blend the cauliflower. So that these larger chunks of cauliflower which just blend into a complete soup. So the idea of ingestion and the idea of digesting something that is also probably toxic and living with it. Yeah.
Great. I wonder if Well, we'll open it up to questions and answers, and I feel like, yeah, I mean, I feel like you've addressed a lot of my sort of queries about your works, and then, you know, just really thinking again back to these relationships between disembodiment. But I mean, I love the relationship of these membranes, like one being geographical, one being this sort of, you know, these internal organs. Yeah, should we open it up to Q&A? And please feel free to type anything in the chat, or, oh yeah, what I sort of forgot to say in my intro is that the gallery is located at Concordia University, and it's in the Webster Library building. So for me, it's very interesting that the gallery itself is sort of a, you know, a site of knowledge production. And your works are really contributing to that process of knowledge production, especially when, you know, negotiating these really, these are not just complex ideas around caste and capitalism. They're like historically complicated, and something like a conversation in sort of in motion, but it really is, for me, it feels very like timely to address these in what appears as very sort of poetic gestures on with some of your works. I mean, Prajakta, definitely with yours, Sohrab, it's your work is really quite heavy hitting, and it's I wouldn't say poetic. It's very it's a completely different sort of language, but really is documenting. It's documenting the things I think that are ignored and on the kind of peripheral of our imagination, but you know, particularly how you sort of document like ritual as well in your film In the Coast. So yeah, somebody's saying, thank you folks for staying up so late. Absolutely, thank you. But I feel like Prajakta, I feel like you're quite a night bird anyways. I feel like you work and think.
All my mails were reaching at 2 in the morning.
Sort of messaging you sort of super late. Well, I mean, yeah, do you have any questions for me or for each other, or?
No, I think this was an interesting list of artists that, you know, you put together, and I think as an artist yourself, I think it adds a different view to looking at works, which I think is special in a way. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Great. I mean, in sort of preparing for this talk, it's really, there's so much to address, and for me, this exhibition is not necessarily a continuation, but there's definitely a relationship to my earlier research on Ramana Hussain, and her mapping of a kind of Muslim feminist cosmopolitan history of the Indian, you know, Indian nation state, and her work really beginning with the Babri Masjid, and her own. She had, oh God, the word is escaping me now, but she had breast cancer and she had to have a breast removed, and she really, in one of her performances, she takes out that breast and she puts it on a thali, and it looks like the dome of the Babri Masjid, and it's just such an amazing kind of relationship. So, you know, you had that image at the beginning, Sohrab, and it really is. It's interesting how the Babri Masjid has become, God, like this thing that won't die. You know, they're now collecting all this money to build a temple, and also thinking about Ayodhya and like the kind of these places that are like multiple sites, because in some of my research in the past, and this might be a complete myth, apparently there was like a well that had like healing properties, and so Muslims and Hindus would come to this well at this Babri Masjid, and you know, this idea of like multiplicity is really being suppressed right now, and I think this is what is so difficult to understand in a country that is founded on, you know, a secular idea. and the beauty of that secularism while allowing the pluralism of all these religions. And then you have this kind of moment where they're just really, and I feel that every time going back and forth, you just feel this like, this weight is just coming down all the time. And then also, you know, speaking with both of you separately, you were both talking about how you're pummeled with WhatsApp images and how they really infiltrate the home. They infiltrate your own personal space. I don't think we have that same relationship here in North America to how WhatsApp actually functions and the kind of power of it. You know, we have like very expensive phone plans. It's totally different things. Like, you know, the access to like data and data plans in India is completely different. So, you know, everybody has a cell phone. So you're encountering these, like what you're talking about in terms of viral images. Yeah,
it's been a serious issue. I mean, you know, we've had family fights. I mean, you know, people have lost friends and stopped talking to friends because of these really polarized views. You have uncles in your family chats who keep bombarding you with some, you know, extreme, you know, references of hate and fear. And it's no longer out, like just outside your house. It's really within your mind space and personal relationships. So yeah.
There's a question here from Akil. I'm wondering if Sohrab or Prajakta can comment on what it means to have their work presented specifically in Montreal Gyoki-ake context. I don't know if it's challenging as you haven't.
Sohrab, you want to take it?
Well, I think maybe for me, what I'm aware of is that there's a huge you know Indian origin population, I guess, in the US and Canada, and from what we kind of hear is that you know RSS and BJP have a lot of support coming from US and Canada. And so in a way, I think two things. One is that it's great to have this discussion or this exhibition in a place like that. And the other thing is that, you know, time's also changing where we keep reading how, like in universities here, all these kind of conversations are being shut down by the government. I mean, by, you know, already kind of all the vice chancellors and all the government universities, they're all being planted by, you know, the RSS. So it's regular news to hear about, you know, some talk being cancelled, either because of the topic or because of the people invited to speak. And so in a way, I think it's twofold, you know. I think recently I curated an exhibition in Dubai, which was looking at like the visual history in South Asia. It was in a South Asian institution, but I don't really know what it means to be South Asian. I don't know what it means to be Indian. The only work of mine in which I've actually directly taken on that role of being Indian is my work in Kashmir, because I feel like, you know, is to contextualize and to kind of take a position, a political position. So it's actually part of the work. But what was very interesting over there also was that, you know, this question came up there as well. What does it mean to have this show in Dubai? It kind of, Dubai was a place without baggage for us. So in some ways, you know, like there were people from Pakistan coming for the exhibition, Bangladesh, India. It didn't really matter because the, you know, participants were from everywhere, and we could talk about these, talk about unfixing of things quite a bit. And I think that for me, hopefully, you know, having the show in Montreal can also help in unfixing some of the things that at least maybe we assume, maybe wrongly to some degree. But, you know, given that it's such a, you know, fixed world right now, I think we're hoping that, at least I'm hoping that, you know, whatever, you know, conversation that we have had, what, you know, Birender and Raj and Sajan will have, with Swapna and the works in general as well. They might unfix certain things, because even in India, we keep hearing there's no caste, but it's the biggest fallacy. It's the biggest denial. And somehow I'm aware that, right now, like, if I'm somewhere else in the world, I can very easily say I'm brown, but somehow I'll never really say I'm upper caste, because, so I'm hoping that this exhibition kind of disrupts certain things.
I just, but I don't know if you have something to say, but I just wanted to show you this on my phone, if anyone can see it. There were these ads that were put up from the Hindu Forum of Canada saying, "Thank you, India and PM Narendra Modi, long live Canada-India friendship." And this was for providing the COVID vaccine to Canada. So they had paid a media company, Outfront Media, for these digital ads, and Outfront actually pulled it the next day. So they were up for one day. And so that kind of propaganda is very much here, and it's terrifying. And yeah, Indu Vashis, who's the executive director of SAVAC, the South Asian Visual Arts Center, thank you for your comment that this exhibition disrupts the way the identity discourse happens in Canada. Yeah, we suffer, the South Asian suffer from this like intense sort of, they just want us to wear nice things and do our little dance and not really engage with real politics around identity, and also how we in the diaspora enact caste discrimination. And I mean, I began my essay with that because it was really just sort of eye-opening to me of how that kind of continues and what that means over here when it has no relationship to the capitalist system here, for instance. So why are these things why are they being carried with our suitcases as we come to a country as immigrants? So then you get othered twice over. And that is, it's just a very, it's silly. And yeah, I wonder if, Prajakta, did you want to answer that question about what I mean, I think it's quite challenging for all of the artists who are not here for the installation or not here to present your work in person. And I mean, maybe this is a question in a larger sense of like what it means to talk about these ideas. In all of the shows, you both show internationally and have been for many years. What does it mean to sort of transport these ideas into all of these foreign spaces for you?
No, I think Sohrab answered that quite aptly. That yes, there is an agenda. That it's great if some people who are on the other side manage to see the show and at least have a different opinion, or at least hear and listen to different voices. But I think this is the first show, and also I think around the same time I showed at the Taipei Museum, and these have been two shows where one has been absolutely looking at at your own work through your eyes, or the eyes of someone else, and it's been quite interesting. It's also been like almost a feeling of freedom where you let go and see. We made actually a drawing on the wall without me being present, and I think that was quite almost liberating in a way, where you were looking at someone else take over from what you have kind of left. And I think I look at future of exhibitions, or also future of friendships like this, where you kind of start a line and it gets continued by someone else and taken over by someone else. And yeah, so yeah, kind of it was a liberating moment, I think, at that, when one could just let go of work and see it through someone else's eyes.
There's a question here saying, I really loved hearing how Sohrab has been working to unfix images and their meaning and accepting the absurdity, but knowing the reach of discussions happening in the art scene versus WhatsApp forwards not being comparable. How do you hope to change conversations within India? Is it possible? Curious about how much art plays a role in the Indian middle class. Yeah, I would also add to that, do you see any shows on sort of caste and caste violence happening in India in such a, like, would you see this configuration of artists being shown in India?
I mean, I think that there's a lot happening here, but not in the gallery scene. I think Instagram, for example, is a very important space right now.
Yeah.
There's Siddesh Gautam, Artetkar. There are like lots of new voices. I think, the rape in Hathras last year, which was preceded by, the George Floyd killing. There was a resonance, but at the same time, there were these new sort of voices that kind of came up. But the truth is that they were not really new voices. I think that it was just a vocabulary that was suddenly being used. So the rest, like there were so many people from upper caste who were actually putting up these black sort of placards on Instagram and saying Black Lives Matter, who had never really talked about caste. And suddenly they were hearing a vocabulary that was very similar to Black Lives Matter, and there was no way they could deny it. So I think it's a very interesting moment right now. I also actually feel that there are a lot of people who might be working anonymously or under monikers, who also actually critiquing the government in exciting ways. Somehow, for me, I mean, I don't know about Prajakta's view on it. Nobody gives a damn about art, beyond a point. I mean, there was this, after the protests, after the anti-CA protests last year, there was this series of exhibitions and all people did. And I think outside the Red Fort here, and the police came and took down quite a few video works. But somehow the photo exhibitions they didn't touch, because they just said this is a photograph. I think because video works for them, film gets connected to pop culture, Bollywood, so somehow anything moving for them became, whereas art or photography, I mean, this in a way is also advantageous to us. You have had comedians who have been taking on the government, but the comedians have also been really fallen short of, I don't know what, but like in terms of caste, like they're really out of touch with some of these other matters. So on the one hand, they will question the government, but on the other hand, caste somehow, there's a lot of denial, because I think caste, makes most of us vulnerable in our own, like the government is very abstract in many ways. You might give, except comedians from the South, but you might give, like somehow it's much easier to critique the government right now than our own sort of social spaces, but it is happening. So you might see a similar configuration, but not necessarily under the ambit of constitutions or like, caste as such. Constitution, you might still have a little bit of that, but not caste, I think, in a formal setting.
Yeah,
Although there are lots of
I agree. Also, I mean, representation of artists in all these mainstream galleries has been extremely, hardly serious representation of artists from, like lower caste or Dalits have not been really properly represented in the mainstream section of art, at least. And it's true, middle class hardly cares about art. This is all happening in a bubble as well.
But I would just add one thing so that, it's not like, I'll add on a more optimistic note, which is that I also think that maybe our role is of also playing historians in a way, where we are noting down, keeping recordings, because there's so much of revisionism that is happening. So much of history is being changed, that in some ways, hopefully whatever trickle that we can provide will maybe at some point be part of something much bigger, because I do think that in some ways it's more and more important to record. And, as much as we talk about the iconic versus, the viral, where the viral has totally swallowed up the iconic, which had the luxury of time. I think that we have a different cumulative system at the moment, where little by little, artists can sort of build for a much larger conversation in the future, and not so much, even if it is not really in the present. So I think we are living in a time where it's important to kind of respond in some way or the other. And there are a few people doing it. Hopefully more people will, there are lots of people doing it who are not considered part of the mainstream, but they're actually in a way doing work that is far more urgent.
So
I think we should end there on your optimistic note, Sohrab. And no, I also just want to congratulate you, because both of you are working. You're able to make work with so much happening around you, and you're able to still comment on it. I think that's really such a challenge. The kind of the time lapse between like processing and something happening at the same time, and particularly this last year has just been, it's just been so like violent and traumatic, and so I just want to congratulate both of you for being able to produce work in that environment and still have it be so powerful and so subtle at the same time. And I'm really grateful that you agreed to be in this exhibition with my long emails and and I think we've been speaking for almost 1.5 years now, so yeah. So I think we'll end there. Oh, there's one more question here, sorry. This is from Jyoti Argade. Thank you so much for this insightful and provocative conversation. Prajakta and Sohrab, I'm struck with how your work bears witness to the trauma that the laboring body has endured through the project of nationalism, specifically skewed by the liberalization of the economy in the 80s and 90s and the fantasies of India's success that social media promulgates. There's an honest account of the decay that the project of nationalism has delivered in each of your work. I'm wondering whether you might comment on how your work may resuscitate a greater possibility of what Indianness may mean now.
I don't know. I mean, at the moment, it is just holding strongly to the constitution and, democracy, because they're all rewriting the narrative. Every day there is a new narrative. They want to quite clearly say that, I think the new nation, I mean, they almost want to forget 15th of August and claim the new date for the Hindu nation. I don't know. I mean, also this whole idea of Indianness is so problematic and it's always we who are asked as what you as Indian artists are to offer, and especially when you are showing abroad or things like that, you always labeled as this. And I always wonder, none of the British artists would be asked as, what it is to be British or American in that sense. So I don't know. I mean, as Sohrab said, we really grew up with not really thinking of us as Indian citizens in that sense, or when you grew up with Madonna and MTV and also the Ramayana playing at the background, and yeah, so I think we're just complex creatures of this whole digital planet that we all inhabit now. So.
My mom is from Dhaka, like my mom's family, and my father's family is from Lahore. I'm kind of stuck in the middle. Even within India, when people ask me where you from, I have to go about a long story to kind of look at myself. And I think I grew up, even as a kid, being taunted for not being pedigree Punjabi, pedigree Bengali, like, so somehow I don't know, for me, Indianness is, I never knew like I never thought about it till recently, which, where Indianness became more about excluding, like over here, like how an idea of Indianness is being imposed onto us, where we are being told, you're Indian and this person is not Indian. And I think that's, I think that's what makes me sort of want to define Indianness in something more open than something shut. So as much as I might want to rebuff this identity, like I want to rebuff this identity in the art space, because it's very weird for me if I end up calling myself an Indian photographer and whatever, Indian artist and Indian filmmaker. And like I'm now writing to people and asking them, telling them that I don't want to be part of certain shows, which are making it about, like this, but that's the sort of black and white parameter, while I go give solidarity to protest, which is, against the CA or something, because there is something happening in the real space. That is, I think, where this Indianness is not as abstract, it's really about exclusion. It's about including, but it's mainly about excluding something. So I think for me, Indianness right now kind of, yeah, true. Indianness has existed for such a short time. And I think that we are still living in those echoes,
Yeah. No, I mean, the idea also, like, and I'm thinking about, where's that book that I have? It's and Laura Stoller, the Duress, in which, this idea of the kind of legacies of imperialism and legacies of sort of colonialism, and how they, what we're seeing in terms of a number of governments moving to the right is a way of suppressing multiplicity. So the kind of the legacy that that these sort of invading capitalist entities have brought in, and the kind of long sort of response to that is to basically quash. Yeah, I don't know about, or like how Indianness also extends to us diaspora, and what Canadianness also means is something that we're also negotiating as settler colonials every day. So yeah, and also like an exhibition with, for me to curate an exhibition of 5 Indian artists, and I'm very conscious of the fact that there are no Muslim artists in this exhibition, but I am speaking about this, this kind of current anti-Islamization in the country, on behalf of the government, the BJP.
I would say that in Dubai, I asked someone if the person was from Dubai, and I got the answer, I'm from Dubai, but not from Dubai. And somehow that for me is the clearest sort of location, which I think even exists for me, where I want to choose what Indianness is for me and what it is not, basically. And like someone said, it's different for everyone.
All right. I guess, should we end there on this gigantic question? I mean, I really love that you have this Lahore and Dhaka, the kind of this, yeah, geographically, I think that's quite amazing.
But we should someday hear the story of how they met and all that.
Yes.
I think that would be super exciting. So some other Zoom call for sure.
Okay. Well, thank you again. Oh, did you want to say anything?
Oh, I was just going to say thank you.
Okay.
To you 3, and thank you to Swapnaa for bringing Sohrab and Prajakta into conversation. And thank you to everyone who attended today and for all your participation in the chat. I'm just going to put into the chat and then I'll let Swapna have the final word. But I'll just put into the chat the other programs that are coming up, because there's a second part to this discussion that will be happening in January. So it would be fantastic if those of you who are here today can join us again in the new year to carry on the conversation around Swapna's exhibition. And again, yeah, thank you again for everyone for your participation. And again, Swapna, for the incredible exhibition and the conversations and the plurality you're bringing to constitutions, which is immediately there in the exhibition title, and which both Sohrab and Prajakta contribute many angles to thinking about what is a definition of a constitution or your constitution or a national constitution. So thank you all three.
Thanks, Robin. And then just to end, I hope Sohrab and Prajakta, you can see all the nice comments in the chat before we go. So great. It's been such a pleasure to talk with both of you, and really a pleasure to talk over the last year. Oh, we should all watch Gandhi and Wish My Uncle. Yeah, and so the chat with Rajashri, Burinder, and Sajjan will happen in January, and that should be a very, it's almost like a complement to this conversation, in which we'll be looking at, actually in a way, we're looking at a lot of how they both, well, Sajjan and Rajashri, how they both sort of incorporate poetry into their work, and kind of early Dalit activists who were using poetry as their kind of key form of activism. All right, I'm going to end the chat. Have a good sleep.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye, Sohrab. Bye, Swapna.
Bye, Sohrab. Bye,
Good
Prajakta.
night.
Thanks again. Bye.
Bye.
So,